Accessible Gaming, presented by Matt Shifrin and Gary Bartos. This is a recording made after Matt and I presented on this subject for the first time at Comicazi, a comics and gaming store in Somerville, Massachusetts. First, I'll mention that our goal here is universal accessible gaming. That is gaming for all of us, for everyone. And now Matt can introduce himself. And I'm Gary Bartos. I've worked in vision technology for about 30 years. And most recently, I've been working in assistive technology for blind and visually impaired people. 1 in 6, 1 person in 6 has a disability. And I'd like to read a quote here from Eitan Gleinert from his thesis. Accessibility is an extreme form of usability, and making a game accessible to one group usually makes it usable to many. Now, to put this talk in context, we're going to start with some principles. The first is that accessibility is a right. Accessibility is a right. That's the foundation on which the rest of the talk is going to be built. And we're focused on universal accessibility. This is the ideal. This is the goal. And what universal accessibility means is an equitable experience for all players, all gamers. And we ask that you consider the gamer's journey, not just the accessibility of the game, the colors, the design of the meeples and so on, but consider the entire journey of someone, let's say, going to a game night. So it's like the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell talked about, but with better snacks. So someone starts at home, they travel to the gaming site, they'll meet people, chat a bit, and perhaps just before the game starts, everyone's going to review the rules or go over the setup that they had last time. Maybe if this is a role-playing game, you talk about where things left off in the previous session. And then you start playing the game. During the game, there's table talk. And after game night wraps up, our gamer goes home. Now consider at each of these points, accessibility is a consideration. So once again, accessibility is a right. Our goal is universal accessibility, and that means an equitable experience for all players. We're going to present 5 types of equity in gaming for you to consider. First, equal social accessibility. Matt, why don't you talk about that a bit? Next, the price to play a game should be the same for everyone. We want equal price to join a game and play. Now, some game nights, if it's hosted at a gaming store, may cost a few dollars. Maybe you pay $3 or $5 US, and you can play as long as you're there. That price should be the same for everybody. And the price of the game itself should be the same. So to take an example, we can look at a game like Catan, very popular game. Matt, why don't you talk a little bit about the price difference between different versions of Catan? Okay, so for a game to be accessible, we're also aiming for equal outcomes. That is, all the game tasks are accessible and can be completed by every gamer at the table, or every gamer, if it's a remote game, who's joining, let's say, over Steam. So every gamer can, let's say, roll the dice, hold the cards, or know what their cards are, can determine the state of the board if you're playing a board game. Every single aspect of the game should be accessible. Equal usability. This covers two areas, mental and physical. So there is a mental load associated with playing games. Matt, why don't you talk a little bit about the mental load when you play a game? And we also need to consider the physical load. So if someone has limited dexterity of their hands, limited hand strength, they may have difficulty holding the cards in their hand. It's necessary. Particularly small pieces can be difficult for some people to grasp and hold. I'll bring up the example of King of Tokyo, a game I enjoy playing with my child very much. The dice are a nice big size, easy to grasp, but the little energy cubes can be kind of tricky to grab onto. Next, and possibly the most difficult form of equity to achieve, is equal time to accomplish a game task. Can Matt, can I, can any other player complete a round, roll the dice and read the dice, review the rules, understand the state of the game board, all in equal time compared to someone who does not have any disabilities? Okay, so social price outcomes usability time, SPOUT. Not the greatest acronym, but it's what we've got right now. We'd certainly welcome comments or suggestions about which of these we might change. But this is what we're going for. Equal social accessibility, equal price for all players, equal outcomes when players attempt to complete different gaming tasks, equal usability, both in terms of the mental effort and the physical effort, and equal time to complete any part of the game. Now, for a first example of a game, we're going to talk about Dungeon Mayhem. This is a D&D card-based game. Now, these are cards with text and pictures. And Matt, who is totally blind, is not going to be able to read these. So one of our options is a new app called Retinaid, Retinaid. Matt, why don't you talk about Retinaid a little bit? Okay, so considering Retinaid, let's talk about the time metric. We're shooting for equal time for all players. Now, if we take someone like Matt, who's totally blind, or someone who otherwise has a print disability, is unable to read the card, according to our time metric, we're actually going to measure now if the card has ink print alone, that is just printed text, effectively, it will take infinite time for a player with a print disability to read this card. And we're talking about without assistance. So they will not be able to read this card at all. Next, we consider the Retinaid app. And we can measure how long it takes Matt or some other player to read a card using the Retinaid app. Okay, that's another metric. Next, what if we clipped one of the corners of the card? So this will make it easier for someone to identify the top right corner of the card to ensure that the card is facing the camera on the phone where the Retinaid app is running. If a player can rotate the card correctly, then we would expect, but we have to measure whether or not this is going to take less time. And finally, Yes, you could add Braille stickers or you could Braille the cards. And for people who are Braille readers like Matt, this could take considerably less time. You can read every card very quickly. But this takes additional effort and resources. And you should also keep in mind, even though we are aiming for universal accessibility of games, if you're considering brailing your games, which again would make people who know Braille very happy, you also have to keep in mind that in the US, there are only about 100,000 to 150,000 people who know Braille. You're only going to reach a small fraction of those people. And of those people you reach who become aware of your game, an even smaller fraction are actually going to play it. So do keep that in mind when you consider, hey, am I making my game universally accessible? Next, let's talk about Wingspan, popular board game with cards. Now, Stonemaier Games released their vision-friendly card set. And what I have on the screen right now are two cards. From the original base game, I have the Acorn Woodpecker card. And I'll just describe the card a little bit. So at the top, it says Acorn Woodpecker. And then underneath it in italic print, it has the scientific name of the bird. On the left side, you have symbols representing different aspects of gameplay that are relevant to this bird. There is a lovely drawing of the acorn woodpecker holding an acorn in its mouth as it clasps a tree with its claws. Underneath is a description of what happens with this bird when you play the card. And I'll just read it. It says, when activated, gain 1, and then there's a symbol for wheat, from the bird feeder if available. You may cache it on this bird. And finally, at the bottom, I've got to say this is possibly my favorite part of the game. As much as I love this game, this is the thing I think I love the most, the bird fact for Acorn Woodpecker. And the bird facts, I should say, for all the cards are text at the very bottom of the card, and there is a graphic showing where the bird can be found in the world. And for the Acorn Woodpecker, the bird fact reads, in a single dead tree, these birds may drill as many as 50,000 holes for storing acorns. Okay, now, before Stonemaier Games released their vision-friendly card set, I actually contacted them, and we went back and forth with emails a little bit, and I suggested some design changes that did actually make it into the published card sets, the vision-friendly card set. So on the right side of our slide, we have the vision-friendly card for the Acorn Woodpecker. Now, the name Acorn Woodpecker is in slightly larger text. It'll be a little bit easier for people to read, people like myself who now require reading glasses. The contrast is a little bit stronger for symbols on the left side of the card. The drawing, the picture of the Acorn Woodpecker itself, the bird with the acorn in its mouth, is the same size. To the right and bottom of that bird is the actual wingspan, 46 centimeters. Now, for the vision-friendly card set, the CM representing centimeters is underneath the numbers. That is a design that I have used for industrial automation user interfaces for years, because as a number changes, if there is a number that is changing from moment to moment, or from, in this case, bird to bird, that should be separate from the text that is not changing. So CM, and then there is a symbolic representation of wings. And the vision-friendly text, when activated, gain 1 grain or wheat from the bird feeder. If available, you may cache it on this bird, is in black ink on a white background. So the font is a little larger, it's a little easier to read, and it's much higher contrast text. And instead of having the bird fact at the bottom, I did suggest they remove it. And instead of having the nice globe showing where you can find the bird, there's the text NA, North America. That's where the acorn woodpecker can be found. Now, after talking or going back and forth with Jamie Stegmeyer, the co-founder of Stonemaier Games, he and I had a videotaped YouTube conversation. It runs about an hour, and we talked about, I'll just read the title of the video, 10 vision-friendly games, and in parentheses, with a special guest, which happened to be me, Gary. The games we talked about were Azul, Dune Imperium, King of Tokyo, Nyctophobia, Parks, Skull, Splendor, The Crew, Seven Wonders, and Wingspan. So in the description of this YouTube video, in the text below, you'll find a link to this video if you'd like to watch it. Now, next I'd like to highlight a local designer. And I'm going to talk in particular about dual coding in Dragon Soul is Sebastian's game. Now, I put the link here in the slide, but I also put the link to Dragon Soul below. And Sebastian and I met about a year ago, and I made a few suggestions about how the game could be made a little bit more colorblind friendly. And so on the slide, I have 3 pictures. On the left, I have a not very well lit picture of a bunch of gaming pieces. So there are gaming pieces numbered 1 through 6. There are 4 circular pieces with drawings of different dragons. And at the bottom, there are 4 square pieces showing different castles with different designs. Now, it may be hard to see in this picture, but this is not at all unrepresentative of the sort of dim lighting you may have on some game nights, but the middle 2 castles are green and red. But notice they also look different. Each castle has a different look. So this is dual coding. Jamie and I talk about this a bit in that YouTube video from the previous slide. So dual coding is when you present more than one method of distinguishing game pieces. And to ensure that you are making your game accessible to people who are colorblind, which is a really common disability, you want to make sure you don't have red and green pieces that are only distinguished by color. And that could be meeples, that could be, in this case, cardboard pieces, whatever it may be. You do not want to distinguish 2 pieces or 2 squares on a board by color alone. So what Sebastian chose to do was to make the game pieces distinguishable by shape, by their design. Each dragon looks different. For the pieces that are numbered 1 through 6, there's a large number in each piece, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the red and green castle pieces are distinguishable by the design. Now, on the far right, I've presented a pure black and white or grayscale images where you can see, with a total lack of color, that the pieces are all still distinguishable. Now, for red-green color blindness simulation, I used color-blindness.com, and it's the Coblis software, color blindness simulator, COBLIS. And again, a link to that simulator will be in the description below. Now, when it comes to role-playing games, I'm just going to talk briefly about the one that has really got me excited recently, which is Morkborg, Dark Fort. This is a rules light role-playing game. And if you are getting into making your games accessible, and if you design or if you play role-playing games, or if you host sessions for role-playing games and you want to have a more inclusive gaming session, I recommend going for a rules light RPG. In particular, I would suggest Morkborg. What is interesting about Morkborg is that the creators of the game have effectively open sourced it. You can create your version of a game. You can create a Morkborg compatible game. Perhaps my favorite compatible game that I've read about, but I haven't played yet, takes place, I believe it's in former Yugoslavia, and some goblins build drag cars and race them. And this is within the context of a fantasy role-playing game. So just cool. Now I'm going to read aloud one part of the licensing terms for Morkborg. Here it is. If you adhere to these terms, you are allowed to publish free or commercial material based upon and/or declaring compatibility with Morkborg without express permission from either Occult or Monster Games and so on and so forth. So the creators. Now, why Morkborg? It's funny. It's rules light. and it has a very distinct aesthetic. So one of the page I think I find the most funny in the core rules is the bad habits page. So you roll a d20, a 20-sided die, to determine your character's bad habits. So I think my favorite is if you roll a 7, and I'll read it aloud. Best friend is a skull. Carry it with you, tell it everything. You trust no one more. If you roll a 6, unable to get to the point, have never actually finished a story. If you roll a 14, pyromaniac. If you roll an 18, you giggle insanely at the worst possible times. What an awesome concept. Beyond like strength, intelligence, wisdom, all these standard fantasy role-playing game traits, bad habits. So you can make your own very accessible game, a very accessible rules-light role-playing game based on Morkborg. That is my intention as part of my effort to create a textbook about accessible gaming. So I'm going to read from Eitan Gleinert's thesis again. The name of the thesis is The Human Controller, Usability and Accessibility in Video Game Interfaces. Here's a quote. Design for only one group is problematic, as it tends to lead to gaming segregation, a notion of separate games for separate groups. Such design invariably leads to accessible games that, by and large, are lower quality than their inaccessible, quote, mainstream counterparts. Disabled gamers themselves dislike this model, as again, they want to play the same games as everyone else. And I'll mention that Eitan is now president of Firehouse Games in Boston. Now let's move on to video games. Is The Last of Us Part 2 the most accessible video game ever? I don't know. What do you think? Now, the game was reviewed by Steve Saylor, who's a well-known blind gamer. He contributed or he consulted on the game, and he also reviewed it. And if I remember correctly, when he first posted about the game after its release, he cried, and rightly so. If you design a game that makes someone cry with joy, I'd say you've achieved a great thing. Now, when it comes to gaming on desktops and laptops, some people may have difficulty with different controls because of physical disabilities. So a new way of controlling a Windows or Mac computer with head movements, mouth movements, is free software called Cephable. Cephable. I saw a demonstration of this about a month ago, and it was really impressive. The founder of the company stood up in front of an audience and set up a triggering event using just head motions, set up live right in front of us, did it quickly. So I would really recommend you check out this software and you consider, can this software offer accessibility for your video game? Now, we have a whole bunch of references that we didn't talk about. So blog posts, textbooks, all these sorts of things. And it's on my website, echobatics.com. So if you go to echobatics.com, ECHO, echo, BAT as in the animal, IX.com, then you'll find this page of references. And if you're sighted, or if you can read this QR code with your camera, that will take you right to this page. Posted the page at the end of June 2024, but I'll be updating it periodically as I have more references. Finally, we can talk about playtesting and observation. So when you go to a game night, and maybe you're bringing a new game for playtesting, consider splitting into two groups. So you have the game designer, who may or may not be playing, and you have the playtesters. But have a group of people who are observing the game. And those observers should be looking for incremental accessibility improvements. How could you get closer with this game to equity in social accessibility? Equal price. Make sure that someone who has a disability doesn't need to buy additional stuff to play the game. Equal outcome. That is, can every player complete every task in the game, preferably without assistance from another person? Equal usability, both in terms of mental effort and physical effort to play the game. And can everyone complete the game tasks in equal time? So these are all measurable. And if you have any questions about how you might measure this, reach out to Matt and me, and we'll have some suggestions. With equal time, it's relatively straightforward. Use a stopwatch. You time different players who have different abilities or disabilities, and you see if you notice any differences. For some of these other things, usability, outcome, price, social, some of them are easier to imagine in terms of metrics. Some of them, again, we'd be happy to offer suggestions because in some cases, accessibility has to be considered game by game. So in the coming year, we're going to offer more principles and more suggestions about how you can design your game to be universally accessible. We're going to propose a standard, but in the meantime, feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you get to see us for one of our in-person presentations.